On a bright, crisp afternoon in downtown Chicago, Special Agent Maya Carter stepped into a small boutique tucked between two larger stores. She had just wrapped up a long case and wanted to treat her younger sister to something special. Dressed casually in jeans and a blazer, she looked more like a regular shopper than one of the FBI's top agents. The boutique was quiet, with soft music playing in the background and the scent of fresh linen in the air. Maya browsed through the racks, pulling out a few items she thought her sister might like. After making her selections, she walked up to the counter, paid for her purchases, and politely thanked the store owner before heading back outside. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, adjusting her bag on her shoulder, two police officers entered the store behind her. She didn't think much of it at first, but moments later one of them came back out and scanned the street. His eyes landed on her. He tapped his partner on the shoulder and pointed in her direction. Maya felt a flicker of unease but told herself there was no reason to worry. She was an FBI agent after all. She had nothing to hide. The two officers approached her with a firm step. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his face expressionless. The other was shorter, with a sharp jawline and a look that suggested he was always ready for a fight. They stopped just inches away from her, close enough that she could see the badge on one officer's belt glinting in the sunlight. "Ma'am," the taller officer said, his voice calm but commanding. "We need to check your bag." Maya raised an eyebrow. "Is there a problem, officer?" "We received a report that someone matching your description may have taken something from the store," he replied. She nodded slowly, reaching into her bag. "I just bought these items. I can show you the receipt if you'd like." She handed over the bag without hesitation. The officer took it and began rifling through the contents. He pulled out each item carefully, checking the tags and comparing them to the receipt Maya had given him. Everything matched. There was no sign of anything stolen. Still, the officer didn't hand the bag back. Instead, he turned to his partner, who was watching closely. Then, without warning, the shorter officer stepped forward. "You're under suspicion of shoplifting," he said. "We need to do a full body search." Maya blinked, stunned for a moment. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," he said, taking a step closer. "We believe you may be hiding something we didn't find in the bag." "I'm not hiding anything," she said firmly. "And you don't have the right to search me without cause." Her voice remained steady, but inside, anger was beginning to rise. She knew her rights. She also knew how often black women were targeted by law enforcement without justification. Still, she hoped that once they realized who she was, this would end quickly. "I'm Special Agent Maya Carter with the FBI," she said, reaching into her jacket pocket. "Here's my badge." She pulled out her credentials and held them up, for them to see. The taller officer hesitated for just a second, then snatched the badge from her hand. He examined it closely, flipping it over as if expecting it to be fake. His partner leaned in to look too. For a brief moment, Maya thought they might apologize and walk away, but instead their expressions hardened. "This doesn't prove anything," the shorter officer muttered. "Anyone can get a fake badge online." Maya's stomach twisted. "Are you seriously questioning my identity? I work out of the Chicago field office. You can call them and verify if you want." Instead of reaching for his radio or phone, the officer reached for her arm. "We're still doing the search," he said. "Come with us." Before she could respond, both officers grabbed her arms and began leading her toward the back of the store. Customers glanced over, confused and concerned, but no one spoke up. The store owner stood frozen behind the counter, unsure what to do. Inside the back room, the lights were dimmer. A single bulb flickered above them. The taller officer pushed the door shut, while the shorter one stepped forward. "Empty your pockets," he ordered. Maya hesitated. "You have no authority to do this. This is harassment." He stepped even closer. "Empty your pockets now." With slow, deliberate movements, Maya reached into her jacket pockets. She pulled out her phone, her wallet, and a small notebook. She placed them on a nearby table. "Turn around," the officer said. She did as instructed. She felt his hands begin to pat down her sides, then move lower. His touch was rough, almost aggressive. She clenched her jaw, trying to keep her composure. This wasn't just about being accused of shoplifting anymore. It was about power, about control, about race. Then suddenly, his hand froze. He paused, mid-motion, his fingers brushing against something unexpected. Slowly, he reached into her back pocket and pulled out a small, unmarked device. It was sleek, black, and unfamiliar to him. "What is this?" he asked, holding it up. Maya turned slightly, her heart pounding. "That's classified," she said coolly. The officer looked at his partner. The color drained from both their faces. They had seen enough crime shows to know what that device might mean. Surveillance, tracking, something far beyond their jurisdiction. "You're working undercover?" the taller officer asked, his voice suddenly quieter. "I'm always working," Maya replied, her tone sharp. "And now you've interfered with an active federal investigation." The silence in the room was thick. Neither officer responded. They stared at the device, then at Maya, then at each other. Finally, the shorter officer cleared his throat. "This changes things." "No kidding," Maya said, crossing her arms. "Now, are we done here, or do you want to make this worse for yourselves?" They didn't answer. Instead, they exchanged another uneasy glance. The tension in the room had shifted entirely. What had started as a routine stop for Maya had turned into a major mistake for the officers, one that could cost them everything. Maya stood in the dimly lit back room of the boutique, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. The two officers still held the small tracking device between them, their faces pale and eyes wide with fear. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the flickering light above them. Maya could see the shift in their body language. What had started as an aggressive power move had now turned into something else entirely. They were realizing they had made a serious mistake. The taller officer swallowed hard and took a step back. "We didn't know," he said quietly, almost like he was trying to apologize without actually saying it out loud. "No, you didn't," Maya replied sharply. "And now you've touched evidence that's part of an ongoing federal case. Congratulations." The shorter officer looked at his partner again, his face full of panic. "This could get us suspended," he whispered. "You think?" Maya snapped. "You just violated my rights, assaulted me physically, and interfered with a federal investigation. You don't get to be scared now. You should have thought about this before treating me like a criminal." Her voice was calm but firm, filled with the kind of quiet strength that came from years of experience. She knew how to stay composed under pressure. But inside, she was furious. Not just because of what they had done to her, but because she knew they wouldn't have treated a white man like this. This wasn't just about shoplifting anymore. It was about racism, abuse of power, and the way people like her were constantly targeted for no reason other than the color of their skin. Outside the room, the store owner paced nervously near the counter, clearly aware that something big had happened but unsure what to do. Customers peeked through the doorway, whispering among themselves. A few pulled out their phones, recording everything they could see. Finally, the taller officer cleared his throat. "We'll return your belongings and go," he said, handing back the tracking device like it was hot. Maya stepped forward and snatched it from his hand. "That's not going to fix this," she said. "I'm filing a complaint, and trust me, Internal Affairs will want to talk to both of you." Neither officer responded. They simply stepped aside and allowed her to walk past them. She moved, quickly, her heart pounding but her step steady. As she exited the back room, several customers turned to look at her. Some gave her sympathetic looks, others stared with curiosity. The store owner rushed over. "I'm so sorry," he said, quickly. "I didn't know what was happening back there. I thought maybe you had taken something, but then you realized it wasn't about that at all," Maya cut in. "It was about control, about race, about power." He nodded slowly, clearly uncomfortable. "Is there anything I can do?" Maya shook her head. "No, there's nothing you can do. But I'm going to make sure everyone finds out exactly what happened here today." She grabbed her bag from the table where the officers had left it and walked out onto the sidewalk. The fresh air felt good against her skin, but it did little to ease the tension inside her. She pulled out her phone and immediately called her supervisor at the FBI field office. Less than an hour later, 2 agents arrived on the scene. They spoke to the store owner, reviewed the security footage, and collected statements from witnesses. The 2 officers who had searched Maya were still standing nearby, looking like they wished the ground would swallow them whole. One of them kept checking his phone nervously, probably expecting a call from his superiors. Maya watched them closely as she gave her statement to her colleagues. She wanted every detail documented, every word, every action. She knew that if she didn't speak up, nothing would change. And worse, those officers might target someone else tomorrow. As the sun began to set over the city, the footage from the store's security cameras was already being reviewed by the FBI's internal team. It showed everything: how Maya had entered the store calmly, how the officers had followed her in, how they had forced her into the back room, and how they had handled her roughly during the search. It also captured the exact moment when they found the tracking device and realized who they had wrongfully accused. By nightfall, the story had begun circulating online. Someone who had been in the store had posted a video clip showing Maya walking out with her head high, her bag slung over her shoulder, and the 2 officers standing behind her like statues. The comment section exploded with outrage. People demanded justice. Others shared similar stories of racial profiling and police brutality. Maya didn't sleep much that night. Her mind replayed the events over and over. She had spent her entire career fighting crime, protecting people, and serving her country. And yet, in a single afternoon, she had been reduced to a suspect simply because of how she looked. She thought about how many others had gone through the same thing, and how many hadn't had the protection of a badge to fall back on. The next morning, she arrived at the FBI field office early. Her supervisor greeted her with a grim expression. "We're launching an internal investigation," he said. "Your account has already been backed up by witness testimony and video footage. We're also coordinating with the Chicago Police Department." Maya nodded. "Good. Those officers need to answer for what they did." "They will," he assured her. "But this isn't just about them. This is about a system that allows this kind of behavior to happen in the first place." Over the next few days, the story gained national attention. News outlets picked it up. Civil rights organizations reached out to Maya, offering support. Social media was flooded with posts, using hashtags like Current Justice for Maya and Stop Racial Profiling. People across the country were angry, and they weren't going to let this go unnoticed. Meanwhile, the 2 officers were placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. Their names were released publicly, and within hours, people had tracked down their records. It turned out they had been involved in multiple complaints over the years, mostly involving Black citizens who had claimed they were unfairly targeted or mistreated. Maya knew this was bigger than her. This was about accountability, about changing the culture within law enforcement, about making sure that no one else had to go through what she had. Still, she couldn't ignore the emotional toll, the violation, the humiliation, the feeling of being powerless even when she had the authority to stop it. But she also felt something else: determination. She had survived this. And now, she was going to fight harder than ever to protect others from suffering the same fate. As she sat in her office, reviewing case files and preparing for the next stage of the investigation, she looked out the window and saw the city moving, on as usual. Life went on. But something had shifted, something important, and she was ready to make sure it didn't get buried under bureaucracy or forgotten once the headlines changed. This was just the beginning. Maya sat in the small conference room at the FBI field office, surrounded by a group of agents who had gathered to review the latest developments in her case. The air was heavy with tension. Everyone knew what had happened wasn't just about Maya. It was about something bigger, something that touched every agent who had ever felt the pressure of being judged not by their skills or service, but by how they looked. Her story had spread far beyond Chicago. It had gone national. Across the country, people were talking. News anchors debated the incident on morning shows. Civil rights leaders praised Maya for speaking out, while condemning the actions of the 2 officers. Social media buzzed with hashtags and posts demanding justice. Some called for the immediate firing of the officers involved. Others shared their own stories of racial profiling, proving that Maya's experience was not unique. It was part of a larger, painful pattern. Inside the FBI, the mood was serious. Internal Affairs had launched a full investigation into the conduct of the two officers. They reviewed every detail: how they had followed Maya into the store, how they had ignored her badge, how they had forced her into a back room and searched her without cause. The security footage from the boutique played over and over again in the background of the conference room, showing everything in clear, undeniable detail. Maya watched it silently as she listened to the other agents discuss the legal implications. "This isn't just misconduct," one of them said. "It's a violation of federal law. She's an agent, yes, but even if she weren't, this kind of behavior has no place in our system." Another agent nodded. "We need to make sure this doesn't get buried. We have proof, witnesses, video. That's more than most victims ever get." Maya remained quiet, absorbing everything. She wasn't surprised by the support from her colleagues, but she also knew that this fight wouldn't end inside the walls of the FBI. This was going to play out in courtrooms, in police departments, and in the public eye. And she was ready. Outside the FBI building, protests had already begun. Activists gathered near the Chicago Police Department headquarters, holding signs that read, "Justice for Maya," and "End racial profiling." Local news crews filmed interviews with demonstrators who shared their anger and frustration. Some held up photos of people who had suffered similar treatment, reminding the world that Maya's story was not an isolated incident. Back in her office, Maya received a call from her lawyer, a sharp, experienced attorney who had handled cases involving government employees before. "They're trying to downplay it," he told her over the phone. "The department is saying the officers acted based on reasonable suspicion, but we both know that's not true." Maya leaned back in her chair. "Then we show them the truth," her lawyer agreed. "I'll be filing the formal complaint tomorrow. We've got everything we need. Video, witness statements, your testimony. If we play this right, we could set a precedent." She ended the call and stared at her computer screen. A new email had arrived, from the director of the FBI himself. It was short and direct. "Thank you for your courage. We stand behind you." For the first time since the incident, Maya felt a flicker of hope. She wasn't alone in this. The agency she had served for over a decade was standing with her. That meant something. But she also knew that real change didn't come from emails or press releases. It came from action, from accountability, from voices rising together until they couldn't be ignored. That night, Maya sat with her sister, telling her everything that had happened. Her sister listened quietly, her eyes filled with concern. When Maya finished, she reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "Not just because you stood up for yourself, but because you're standing up for everyone else too." Maya gave a small smile. "I didn't plan for any of this. I just wanted to buy you a gift." Her sister laughed, shaking her head. "Well, looks like you gave me something better, a reason to believe things can change." Over the next few days, the pressure mounted. The mayor's office was forced to respond publicly. The city's police chief issued a statement calling the incident deeply concerning and promised a full review of the officers' records. But Maya and her legal team knew words weren't enough. They wanted consequences. Meanwhile, the two officers faced mounting scrutiny. Their past complaints were dragged into the light. Former co-workers spoke anonymously about their aggressive tactics and biased behavior. One officer had been accused of rough-handling a teenager during a traffic stop years earlier. The other had been reprimanded for using excessive force during a routine arrest. The public outcry grew louder. Protesters marched outside the police station nearly every day. News outlets featured Maya's story on their front pages. Talk show hosts invited experts to debate the issue of racial profiling in law enforcement. And slowly, something began to shift. Inside the FBI, discussions turned toward policy changes. Senior agents met with diversity consultants. Training programs were reviewed. Maya was asked to speak at an internal forum about her experience, not just as a victim, but as a leader who had fought back. Standing in front of a packed auditorium, Maya addressed her colleagues with calm strength. "What happened to me wasn't just about me," she said. "It was about every person who has ever been treated like a criminal simply because of how they look. I'm lucky. I had a badge to protect me. Most people don't. And that needs to change." There was silence after she finished. Then, slowly, applause rose through the room. Not loud, not wild, but steady, respectful, supportive. As she stepped off the stage, one of her senior supervisors approached her. "You did good," he said. "Now let's make sure this leads to real change." Maya nodded. She knew this was only the beginning. The battle ahead would be long and difficult. There would be setbacks. There would be resistance. But she also knew that the truth had power, and once the truth was out, it couldn't be ignored. As she walked out of the auditorium and into the cool evening air, she looked up at the sky. The stars were shining brightly above the city. She thought about all the people who had faced injustice before her, and all the people who still would after her. And she made a silent promise. She would keep fighting, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved to walk through life without fear, without prejudice, without being judged before they even had a chance to speak, and she wouldn't stop until the system changed. Maya's story had taken on a life of its own. What began as a personal violation in the back room of a boutique had become a national conversation about race, power, and justice. Every major news outlet covered it. Talk shows replayed the security footage. Activists used it as fuel for protests across the country. And inside the FBI, Maya found herself at the center of something much bigger than she had ever imagined. The pressure on the Chicago Police Department was immense. The 2 officers involved were still on administrative leave, but now their names were known to millions. Online, people dug into their backgrounds, uncovering past complaints and questionable behavior. A pattern emerged, one that painted them not as isolated bad apples, but as part of a larger problem within the department. Maya knew this wasn't just about those 2 men. It was about a system that allowed this kind of abuse to happen repeatedly. She had seen it before, how some officers believed they could act with impunity, how victims often stayed silent out of fear or shame. But now, thanks to her position, and the undeniable evidence, silence wasn't an option. Her legal team worked tirelessly. They filed motions, gathered testimonies, and prepared for what would likely be a long battle in court. Meanwhile, the FBI launched its own internal review of how agents were treated when off duty. There were discussions about policy changes, ways to ensure that even when agents weren't in uniform, their identities would be respected and verified, immediately if questioned by local law enforcement. But for Maya, the most important fight was outside the courtroom. It was in the streets, in the voices rising up demanding change. She received messages from people all over the country, Black mothers who feared for their sons, young women who wanted to join law enforcement but now questioned whether they would ever be safe, activists urging her to keep speaking out. She agreed to do interviews, not because she enjoyed the attention, but because she knew her voice carried weight. When she spoke, people listened. On one nationally televised show, she sat across from a seasoned anchor who asked the hard questions. "You're an FBI agent," the host said. "You have authority, protection, a badge, and yet you were still treated like a criminal. What does that say about how regular citizens are treated every day?" Maya met the camera with calm confidence. "It says we have a long way to go," she replied. "I was lucky. I had a badge, I had proof. Most people don't. And that's why this isn't just my story, it's everyone's story." The clip went viral. People shared it thousands of times. Some added their own experiences in the comments. Others demanded action. Politicians started weighing in. One senator called for federal oversight of police departments with high complaint rates. Another introduced a bill aimed at improving accountability through body camera transparency and stricter misconduct reporting. Inside the FBI, Maya became a symbol of resilience. Her office walls filled with notes from fellow agents, some thanking her, others sharing their own struggles with bias and profiling. Even white colleagues reached out, admitting they had never fully understood the depth of the issue until now. Still, the emotional toll lingered. Some nights Maya lay awake replaying the moment the officer pulled the tracking device from her pocket. The look on his face, the sudden shift in power. She had trained for years to handle dangerous situations, but nothing could prepare someone for being humiliated by the very system meant to protect them. She talked to a therapist regularly now. It wasn't weakness. It was strength. She refused to let what happened define her, but she also refused to pretend it hadn't affected her deeply. Healing was part of the fight, too. Meanwhile, the city of Chicago continued to buzz with protest energy. Marches formed near City Hall. Local leaders held town halls. Community groups organized forums where people could share their stories. Maya attended a few, always listening more than speaking. She didn't want to overshadow anyone else's pain. She wanted to amplify it. One evening, she walked through a neighborhood rally where a group of high school students had gathered to speak. A young black girl stood on a makeshift stage holding a sign that read, "My future shouldn't depend on my skin." She looked nervous but determined. "I've been stopped by police twice this year," she said into the microphone. "Once, for walking home after track practice. Once for sitting in a park reading a book. I'm 16. I haven't done anything wrong, but I feel like I have to prove I'm not a threat just for existing." The crowd erupted in applause. Maya felt a lump in her throat. That girl could have been her 20 years ago, and if things didn't change, she could be someone else's daughter tomorrow. Later that night, Maya posted a video on social media. It was short, just her sitting in front of a plain wall, speaking directly to the camera. "If you've been treated unfairly by law enforcement," she said, "don't stay silent. Speak up. Share your story. File reports. Demand answers. You deserve justice, and you're not alone." The video spread quickly. Thousands commented. Some thanked her. Others asked for advice. A few critics tried to argue that cops had a hard job and that not all officers were bad. Maya responded calmly, acknowledging the difficulty of police work while making it clear that accountability was necessary for trust to exist. Back at the FBI, internal discussions turned toward reform. Senior leadership announced new diversity training programs. They created a task force focused on interagency cooperation, aiming to improve relationships between federal agents and local police departments. Maya was invited to sit on the committee, an opportunity she accepted without hesitation. She knew real change wouldn't come overnight. She knew there would be resistance, but she also knew that once the door was open, it couldn't be shut again so easily. As she walked into the field office one morning, she passed a group of younger agents huddled around a screen. They were watching the latest news coverage of her case. One of them looked up and smiled. "You're kind of a legend now," he said. Maya shook her head. "Just doing my job." But deep down she knew it was more than that. She had become something else, a voice for the voiceless, a fighter for fairness, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, standing up for what's right can light a fire that spreads far beyond one person. And that fire was burning bright. Maya sat in the courtroom, her back straight, hands resting calmly on the table in front of her. The room was quiet but filled with tension. Reporters lined the back rows, cameras ready to capture every moment. Across from her, the two officers who had wrongfully searched her sat with their lawyers, looking tense and uncertain. This was the first official hearing in the legal battle that would determine whether they faced real consequences for what they had done. The judge entered and everyone stood. The proceedings began with formal introductions, lawyers stating their names, the court clerk reading the case details. Maya listened carefully as the prosecution laid out their argument. The officers had acted without cause, ignored her identity as a federal agent, and violated her rights during an unlawful search. The video footage played again on the large screen at the front of the courtroom. It showed everything clearly: how she had walked into the store peacefully, how the officers had followed her in, how they had forced her into the back room, and how they had searched her roughly without any justification. As the footage played, Maya felt a familiar tightness in her chest. She remembered the way one officer had grabbed her arm too hard, the way the other had looked at her like she was nothing more than a suspect. But she also remembered the moment when everything changed, the exact second they found the tracking device in her pocket and realized they had made a huge mistake. The defense lawyers tried to argue that the officers were only doing their job. They claimed the officers had received a report about a possible shoplifter matching Maya's description and that they had acted based on standard procedure. But the prosecution quickly dismantled those claims. They pointed out that Maya had shown her badge immediately, that she had provided receipts for all the items in her bag, and that there had been no attempt to verify her identity before forcing her into a humiliating and illegal body search. Maya was called to testify. She stood up, smoothed her suit jacket, and walked to the witness stand. She placed her hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. As she spoke, she kept her voice calm but firm. She described exactly what had happened from the moment she entered the boutique to the moment the officers found the tracking device. She didn't hold back. She told the court how it had felt to be treated like a criminal simply because of the color of her skin. How she had spent years protecting people, yet had been reduced to a suspect in a matter of minutes. How the experience had shaken her confidence, not in herself, but in the system she had dedicated her life to serving. When the defense lawyer questioned her, he tried to challenge her version of events. He asked if she had ever failed to identify herself during past police encounters. She answered honestly, no. He asked if she had ever refused to cooperate with law enforcement. Again, she said no. He tried to suggest that she had overreacted, that maybe the officers had just made an honest mistake. Maya leaned forward slightly and responded with quiet strength. Mistakes happen, she said. But this wasn't a mistake. This was bias. This was profiling, and it has to stop. The courtroom fell silent after she finished speaking. Even the judge seemed to take a moment before moving on. When the session ended, Maya stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun. Reporters rushed toward her with microphones and questions. She answered a few briefly, then excused herself and walked away, her heart pounding. That night, news outlets replayed clips of her testimony. Some praised her courage, others debated the implications of the case. Civil rights leaders called her words powerful and necessary. On social media, hashtags like Dashu Justice for Maya and Yar Stop Racial Profiling trended once again. Inside the FBI, discussions continued about how to prevent similar incidents from happening to other agents. A new policy was being drafted, one that would require local police departments to verify the identities of individuals claiming to be federal agents. It wouldn't solve everything, but it was a step forward. Maya knew the fight wasn't over. The legal process would take time. There would be more hearings, more arguments, more waiting. But something had shifted. The officers involved could no longer pretend they hadn't done anything wrong. Their actions had been exposed for the world to see. In the weeks that followed, the pressure on the Chicago Police Department grew even stronger. Internal Affairs launched a full review of both officers' records. More complaints surfaced, some dating back years. One officer had been accused of rough-handling a teenager during a traffic stop. Another had used excessive force during a minor arrest. These weren't isolated incidents. They were patterns. Public outrage turned into action. Community leaders held town halls where citizens could speak directly to department officials. Protesters gathered outside police headquarters almost daily, and slowly changes began to take shape. New training programs were introduced. Body camera policies were updated. A civilian oversight board was formed to review misconduct cases. None of these changes erased what had happened to Maya, but they signaled that the city was finally listening. Maya continued to work at the FBI, returning to her regular duties while staying involved in the ongoing reform efforts. She spoke at conferences, met with lawmakers, and worked closely with civil rights groups. She never stopped reminding people that justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoing. It was about preventing it in the first place. One evening, she attended a community event where young people interested in law enforcement careers got to meet current agents and officers. She stood near the back, watching as students asked questions and took notes. A teenage girl approached her shyly. "I saw your interview online," the girl said. "You're really brave." Maya smiled. "Thank you. What do you want to do? Someday?" "I want to be a detective," the girl replied. "But sometimes I wonder if I'll ever be taken seriously." Maya knelt down slightly so they were eye to eye. "You will be," she said, "because people like you are going to change things. You'll make sure that everyone gets treated fairly. That's how we build a better future." The girl nodded, her eyes filled with hope. Maya watched her walk away, feeling a small sense of peace. She had started this journey with pain and anger, but now she carried something else too, a deep belief that change was possible. As she left the event and stepped into the cool night air, she looked up at the stars. The road ahead was long, but she was ready. She had already come so far, and she knew she wasn't walking it alone. The courtroom was packed on the day of the final verdict. Reporters filled the back rows, cameras ready to capture every reaction. Families of the accused officers sat stiffly, exchanging worried glances. Across the aisle, Maya remained calm, her hands resting on the wooden table in front of her. She had spent months preparing for this moment, but nothing could fully erase the weight of what she had been through. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. The clerk called for order, and the case was brought forward. After a long pause, the judge looked toward the jury and nodded. The foreperson stood up, holding a small white envelope. Maya felt her heartbeat quicken as the paper was handed over. The room seemed to shrink as the judge began reading the decision. In the matter of the unlawful search and racial profiling charges against officers James Holloway and Daniel Cruz. He paused, scanning the document before continuing. The jury finds both defendants guilty on all counts. A sharp intake of breath echoed through the courtroom. Some people gasped. Others murmured in disbelief. Maya didn't move at first. She just stared straight ahead, letting the words settle in. Then slowly, almost instinctively, she exhaled. It wasn't exactly relief, more like recognition. Recognition that justice, even if delayed, had finally arrived. Across from her, the two officers sat frozen. Their lawyers whispered among themselves, already discussing possible appeals. But the damage was done. The verdict was clear. They had abused their power, violated someone's rights, and now they would face consequences. Maya stood as the judge dismissed the session. She stepped outside into the cool morning air, where a crowd had gathered in front of the courthouse. Protest. Signs waved above the sea of faces, chants of "Justice, justice" near rang out as people celebrated the outcome. Reporters rushed toward her with microphones and flashing cameras. "Agent Carter," one shouted, "how does it feel knowing you've made history?" She looked at the crowd, then at the reporters, and finally at the sky above. "It feels like truth won," she said simply. "But this isn't just about me. This is about everyone who has ever been treated unfairly because of how they look. I hope this sends a message that no one is above the law, not even those who wear a badge." Her words spread quickly online. Within hours, the hashtag "Justice Prevails" started trending. Civil rights leaders praised the ruling. Community organizers called it a victory, and across the country people shared stories of their own encounters with unjust treatment by police. Inside the FBI, the win was seen as more than just a legal victory. It was proof that accountability was possible. Senior leadership used the case as a learning opportunity, updating training programs and strengthening policies around officer interactions with federal agents. A new task force was formed to address bias and misconduct within local departments. But for Maya, the real change came from something deeper. She knew that one verdict wouldn't fix everything overnight, but it had opened a door, one that couldn't be closed again. Over the next few weeks, life slowly returned to normal, at least as much as it could. Maya went back to her regular duties, reviewing cases and working undercover operations. But she also took on a new role. She became a speaker, an advocate, a voice for those who still struggled to be heard. She visited schools, where students asked her questions about courage, about justice, about what it meant to stand up for yourself. She met with young women who wanted to join law enforcement, but feared the same kind of discrimination she had faced. She told them the truth, not to be afraid, but to always protect their dignity, their identity, and their rights. One evening, she stood on a university stage speaking to a full auditorium. "I was lucky," she said into the microphone. "I had a badge. I had video proof. I had support. But not everyone does. That's why we have to keep fighting. For the people who can't fight for themselves. For the ones who are still waiting for their day in court." The audience clapped loudly, some standing in approval. As she stepped off the stage, a student approached her shyly. "I want to be like you," the girl said. "I want to help make things better." Maya smiled warmly. "You already are. Just by being here, by listening, by caring. That's how change starts." Outside, the city lights flickered against the night sky. Life moved on. People kept walking the streets, going to work, raising families. But somewhere beneath the surface, something had shifted. A conversation had begun, and it wasn't ending anytime soon. Maya walked home that night, thinking about everything: the store, the back room, the courtroom, the protests. She thought about the fear she had felt, the anger, the pain. But she also thought about the strength that had carried her through it all. She had entered this journey as a victim. Now she walked away as something else entirely: a survivor, a leader, a symbol of what was possible when truth was spoken and justice was demanded. As she reached her apartment, she looked up at the stars. They were bright tonight, shining through the city haze. She smiled slightly, feeling a quiet peace settle inside her. The fight wasn't over. It never really was. But she was ready. She had proven that one person's story could spark a movement. And she knew that as long as there were people willing to speak up, to stand tall, and to demand fairness, the future held hope. And hope, she believed, was the most powerful thing of all.